This is a microwave history production. Because the speech of this country is different from that of China, the spoken language does not match the Chinese letters. Therefore, even if the ignorant want to communicate, many of them in the end cannot successfully express themselves. Saddened by this, I have had 28 letters newly made. It is my wish that all the people may easily learn these letters and that they may be convenient for daily use. This is from the Hunming Jeongum, which was the Korean book that introduced Hangul to the people, and it was written by King Sejong himself in 1443. So King Sejong was one of the greatest leaders in Korean history. Many Koreans consider him to be the greatest. Not only did he have a very successful record in terms of military victories and governance, he was very interested in science and culture as well. In essence, he was the Korean version of the Renaissance man. In 1420, he created what is a research institute called the Jipyeonjeon, which would advise the king on matters of Confucian rights, governance, and technology. At the research institute, people would be chosen based on merit, not aristocratic birth, and they would be given accommodations and support so that they could focus on their work. And this had really impressive results. Many inventions were created in Korea for the first time, such as armillary spheres, sundials, water clocks, and rain gauges, as well as many important books. This was a time of rapid innovation in Korea. And although these inventions had been created in many parts of the world first, they were developed and progressed even further during this time. For example, the rain gauge was standardized with exact measurements, which allowed data to be compared between different regions. This helped when it came time to determine taxes for farmers. Not only that, star charts and astronomical charts that were influenced by Chinese charts were adapted to make sure that Seoul, or Hansung as it was called during this period, was at the center of this chart instead of Beijing. But I think the most important of these inventions was the Korean alphabet in 1443. According to the Sejongshillok, which is a record of King Sejong's reign in Korea, he himself created Hangul rather than his academic advisors. Unique to Hangul was its incredible ease. Vowels and consonants can be combined to create syllable sounds, compared to Chinese characters, which are logographic, meaning that each character has a specific meaning. Chinese characters required years of mastery, compared to Hangul, which according to King Sejong, an intelligent person may acquire it in one morning, and even a simple-minded fellow can learn it in 10 days. And this quote is according to Jung In-ji, who was working in the research institute. Its ease was purposeful. King Sejong really wanted to create a writing system that was accessible to even the peasant class, so that they could better communicate with each other. Moreover, he wished to expand the usage of Hangul to government and law. In another statement, Jung In-ji said, "Those who studied books in Chinese were concerned about the difficulty of understanding their meaning and purport. Those who administered the penal system were troubled by the difficulty in communicating the complexity of its legal text." This was mainly because, although the Korean aristocratic class was able to speak Chinese, a vast majority of other Koreans were completely illiterate at this time. As many people quickly began to adapt Hangul into their daily lives, it seemed that it would become more and more influential in Korea. But even before King Sejong's death, opposition from the Confucian elite would grow against Hangul. They feared that Hangul would take away their own prestige and power. One of these men was Che Manri, who himself worked in the research institute. But he gave 3 arguments against Hangul's use, at least in the official government capacity. Number 1, he said using Hangul would be akin to quote-unquote disrespecting the senior state. By the senior state, he meant China. Number 2, he said that only barbarian people had their own scripts, and humorously enough presented examples of the Mongolians and the Japanese. He likened the usage of using Hangul in Korea to a civilized state, according to him at least, becoming a barbarian state. Third, and I think the strongest argument, at least in his perspective, was that Korean scholars would not learn the classic Confucian texts if they only needed to write and speak Korean, or in Hangul. If that was the case, the ancient learning that was indispensable to the foundations of Korean culture, would be forgotten by nearly everyone. Che was speaking for many other Confucian scholars. They absolutely despised the writing system. They disparaged it by calling it the Unmun, which is called the vulgar script, or the peasant script. There are similarities between the Korean elite attitude towards Hangul and the Roman elite attitudes towards their own writing, or towards their own Latin writing system. But while Latin had been used for administration and was gradually turned into a language of prose, poetry, and art in ancient Rome, Hangul remained, with very few exceptions, a language sneered at by the elite class. On a moral level, they saw it as going against the already existing society of Korea. But on a practical level, they feared Hangul would endanger their own prestige and power in society. On the other hand, all other Koreans would accept and use this new writing system. It became particularly useful for women who could write journals, letters, and even novels with Hangul. And this was particularly true in a society where women were completely shut off from participating in politics and government. They would use their new power in words to at least take control of their freedom of expression. A rare example of the use of Hangul by the king came during the Imjin War, when Japan invaded Korea in the late 16th century. King Sunjo of Joseon created a letter for the people, written completely in pure Hangul, and this is really interesting. It was a letter, a sort of call to arms, and it encouraged Koreans to fight against the Japanese invaders and provide knowledge of the enemy's movements. In exchange, he offered anyone positions in government. The point of writing it in Hangul was so that all Koreans could read it, while the Japanese would not be able to read it, which is very interesting because it points at the fact that everyone in East Asia was using Chinese characters as the sort of universal language. And the fact that Hangul was able to only be used among Koreans meant that Japanese would not be able to read this letter. And this was strategic in many different aspects, right? And so Hangul was not always supported by Koreans themselves. But as the 19th century unfolded, massive changes to the world and Korea were occurring. And Korea faced threats and from every side. And in a last-ditch attempt to survive, its rulers would begin to finally use Hangul in government and politics. But perhaps it was already too late by that time.